All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Just a quick review of what we did at the start of chapter 2. I mean, I guess all of chapter 2, since we just have the last little bit to finish, and then we will jump into supply and demand today. So remember, we talked about how we are always on the first part of the Cartesian coordinate plane, right? We're always over here in the positive zone. That's why this looks like an L. Right? We're looking at positive numbers of bus tickets, positive numbers of burgers, and we're given a budget of $10. Since burgers are $2 each, that means if I had no bus tickets and all burgers, I'd have 5 burgers. If I had no burgers and all bus tickets, I would have 20 bus tickets, and there are combinations in between. Those combinations we call the boundary of the opportunity set. Those are all feasible and efficient, right? When they're at the end, when they're on the boundary like this, they are what we call feasible, they're obtainable, and they're also efficient, meaning we're not leaving anything on the table. When we talk about budget lines, we're talking about opportunity cost, which is not the summation of all of the next best activities or opportunities that you have, but it's just that one opportunity, right? Just like, yeah. So, we have non-feasible points that are outside of the budget line. The only way to get to a non-feasible point is to have a expansion of a budget line or a production possibility frontier. And those happen, a budget line would happen when your income increases. A production possibility frontier would happen when either capital, labor, or technology increase. So we talked a little bit about how budget lines are straight, but production possibility frontiers or production possibility curves are curved. They're curved because when we get to a point where we're producing a lot of one thing, right? We're producing a lot of healthcare here and not very much education. If we want to squeeze that last little bit out of the orange in order to get more healthcare, right? And to increase by that tiny little amount, we're going to have to give up a lot of education because we're forcing teachers to retrain and become nurses. We're trying to change schools into hospitals, so on and so forth, right? So resources that are best used for different industries are going to be used first, and then the least productive resources are going to be used last, and you're going to get the least amount of productivity from those least productive resources. So as additional increments of resources producing are added, the marginal benefit from these additional increments are going to decline. We talked about how in economics, we have to make economic decisions, and in economic decisions, we have to forget about sunk costs. Can't think about them. They happened in the past. You paid for that movie. You got to figure out whether to leave or not based on how good the movie is, not because of the fact that you paid for the movie. We talked about efficiency, how we have 2 different types of efficiency. There's one that makes a lot of sense, productive efficiency. Why would you produce why would you produce 17 cars and 20 computers when you could produce 170 cars and 20 computers, right? So it's impossible to produce more without decreasing the quantity of producing another one. So anything that is along the line is going to be productively efficient. And then allocative efficiency, that's more of a nuanced question that has to do with the priorities of a society, right? So, with our example here between electricity and food, we know that at some point in the middle here, there's an allocative efficiency, but we know that it's not all electricity and no food, and we know that it's not all food and no electricity, right? Nobody here is trying to become a Mennonite anytime soon. So we talked about how different countries have different opportunity costs. Some countries are landlocked. Some countries have very fertile land. Some countries have, amazing naval powers and stuff like that, right? So they use this comparative advantage in order to specialize and grow their economies. We talked about how sometimes firms in society don't act in a way that fits economic thinking, and we're going to address this more when we talk about consumer choices in a later chapter. We talked about how, well, all in all, maybe people should not act this way, right? And we talked about the whole self-interested situation, about how, we model that people are self-interested, and maybe they shouldn't be acting self-interested. But we're not trying to ascribe a morality to people here. We're trying to describe how they actually are and actually act in real life. And more times than not, people are self-interested. They do things that bring them pleasure, and they don't do things that bring them pain, right? They do things that bring them more money, and they don't do things that are going to cost them fines or whatever the case may be. When we talk about economics, right, we are going to classify everything into 2 different types of statements. And this is really an approach that you can take with all of your social sciences, right? It's not just economics. Physics and math, those are different things, right? 2 + 2 = 4. Like the equation of a ball traveling through the air is the equation of a ball traveling through the air, right? But in economics and a lot of social sciences, we falsely believe that everything we read in the textbook is true and fact, while some of the things are what we would call positive statements, which are facts, right, describing the world as it is, but other things are normative statements. There's a V here. Normative statements, right, how the world should be. These are subjective and a matter of opinion. There's arguments about how positive and how normative different social sciences and economists should be. We will talk about that in greater detail once we get to those chapters. We left off talking about the invisible hand, which is a famous concept from Adam Smith's 1776 Wealth of Nations book, which explained that individual self-interested behavior leads to positive social outcomes. And there's a great quote that I will read. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner. It's that the butcher, the baker, and the brewer, they intend only their gain. And in this, as in many other cases, they're led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. So it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, baker, candlestick maker, right? It's the fact that they are trying to make a profit for themselves, and as a result of the market system, their self-interest is translated to a social good. We also talked about specialization. Adam Smith was one of the first people to really highlight specialization, right? Talked about the pin factory and how a single person could maybe make 10 pins in a day, but if you put let's see here, if you put 10 people in a room, they can make 48,000 pins. So when you specialize and focus on one little task, there's so much time saved. You're able to become much more efficient at that, and as a result, the total productivity increases dramatically. Any questions on chapter 2 concepts, chapter 2 stuff? Just like sprinted through the whole thing. So really the thing with the invisible hand is the notion that consumers are going to encourage businesses to offer goods and services that meet their needs. So they signal to the businesses what good or service they need or want. And then again, the baker, the brewer, the candlestick maker, right? The business person, they are using, self-interested motives, right? So we have a social good that can emerge, doesn't always emerge, can emerge. This is where we start with the wishy-washy language of economists, right? Can emerge from selfish individual actions. And the other part, which, I guess is splitting hairs since I just said selfish right here, right? So I should probably erase this and say self-interested, because there's definitely a schism, or, if you talk to some history of economic thought people, they'd be like, but the morality of sentiments was also published around the same time as the Wealth of Nations, and you really have to read both of them back to back in order to understand the full impression of what he was trying to say. Because in the morality of sentiments, he describes specifically how, self-interest does not always equal selfishness. And, self-interest in economics doesn't necessarily imply self-interest in all or any other aspects of life, right? So things to keep in mind. Questions on chapter 2? Sweet.